Coming up on Network Africa. One person dead as most parts of the Ghanaian capital is covered by floods. $14 million. That's how much South Africa owes the Cuban doctors who came in to help with COVID-19. Plus, the World Health Organization warns of the risks associated with the use of antibiotics in the treatment of COVID-19. Thanks for joining us on Network Africa. I am Bisi Adebayo. We'll begin with news just in. Burundi's President Pierre Nkurunziza has died. He reportedly died of a heart attack. The 55-year-old was one of the country's long-serving rulers who sought a third term in 2015 after being controversially nominated by his party for a third term in office. He was re-elected in July of the same year and on June the 7th, 2018, announced he would not seek another term when his current term ends in 2020. May his soul rest in peace. Now, the Ghanaian capital, Accra, is faced in floods following torrential rains on Monday, and one person is said to have died, and flood waters destroyed several properties and makeshift structures on major roads. Port drainage and buildings erected in waterways in many parts of the city are said to be prone to flooding whenever it rains. The country's soldiers and staff from the National Disaster Management Organization have been rescuing residents stranded by the floodwaters, which rose to 4.5 meters in some parts. Last year, the World Bank approved $200 million funding for the flood and sold waste management for communities in the Accra region. But not much has been done yet to end the perennial flooding. Meanwhile, the Ghanaian Meteorological Agency says residents should expect a rainstorm today. And staying in Ghana, police have arrested Ernesto Yeboah, who is the organizer of the protest against police brutality, charging him with failing to obtain a police permit for the protest which held on Saturday and for breaking the rules on public gatherings. His lawyer, Francis Avia Sosu, says the charges are baseless. But more than 60 people attended the protest, which turned into a vigil, one of many in the wake of the anti-racism protests around the world, following the killing of African-American man George Floyd by a police officer. But in Ghana, they were highlighting police brutality as well, chanting, "We are not free until we are all free." They also honored Ahmed Abri, another African-American man who was shot dead at a point-blank range while jogging in his neighborhood earlier this year, and the Tardy girls, 3 Ghanaian children who were abducted in 2018 and later declared by the police, but whose parents are demanding an independent investigation. A joint police and military team forcibly dispersed the crowds on Saturday and then arrested Mr. Yeboah. Now we have Joy News TV's Roland Walker for more on this. Good afternoon, no, good evening. Thanks for joining us, Roland. Now, the protest, the vigil in Ghana on Saturday were meant to be peaceful. So tell us, why do the police and the military feel the need to intervene?
Well, according to the Public Order Act that we have in the Republic of Ghana, anybody or individual or group that wanted to organize any sort of protest or public event at all would need to give the police 5 to 6 clear days notice. And indeed, the group that was solidarizing with the Black Lives Matter that is led by one Mr. Ernesto Yeboah had done that application. They had been given that permission according to what he showed the media to be able to convene that event, and it was a vigil that was convened on Saturday night. So it's not the first time he is organizing an event at all, And that's a result of that. He's very used to organizing such public events. And he was surprised himself because if you look at the event, he did not just appear on his own. He also had other people of African descent, especially Black Americans who call themselves the diasporans, who had settled here in Ghana for a number of years. Some of them have citizenship. Some of them have also adopted citizenship or are dual citizenship. And there was something that was not expected, according to him. And so he was just picked up by the security apparatus.
The world is still coping with the pandemic, and now these protests against racism are going global. Is police brutality as real in Ghana to warrant a protest?
Police brutality is not rampant in Ghana. Of course, we tend to see year-on-year sporadic events of the police either manhandling people. Sometimes, even right here at Joy News, we've had a number of reports compiled by a number of our correspondents and reporters about police either indiscriminately shooting or wrongly just shooting people in the line of duty. And it's not like you find in situations elsewhere, especially in America or even in the United Kingdom, as you find them. But once in a while, you tend to have some of these events that have been documented. You will remember that the last year we had the national security apparatus during a by-election, for which subsequently a commission was set up. A commission of inquiry was set up by the president to investigate an incident in which we had a number of security personnel of the national apparatus in court, for which this commission, based on its findings, said the personnel who were arrogated that power or that duty to come to the by-election event did not have the right competence in training, the right sort of training also to disperse crowd, to manage an event or event in any way, and so went beyond bounds and flouted the right of normal citizens of our country. That received wide condemnation, not only in Ghana, but also elsewhere across the continent and the world. And so you will find that we have various personnel within the services, especially within the police, who once in a while will brutalize or molest citizens, and these have been brought to the attention of the police hierarchy. What they have done and promised the Ghanaian public is that something will be done about it, but usually it is just a matter thrown to the door.
Now, speaking of the pandemic, Roland, Ghana, like most of other African countries, has eased lockdown restrictions. What sort of measures exist now to help curb the spread of the coronavirus?
I have to again point out vividly that currently our case count, if you take a look at the number of cases we have so far, is giving us the indication of where the direction has been. But let me just first make the statement. In early March, around March 11, March 12, there was the lockdown. It went for about 3 weeks, and then the President of the Republic decided to lift the lockdown, but still maintained a restriction. And this restriction was legalized. There's a law which was approved by the Parliament of the Republic of Ghana. Now, it's called these were contained in the Restrictions Act that ensured that people were not given the opportunity to move about freely, not to convene public events. It was limited to about 25 people, and until the last week was 25, and now has been taken to 50 and subsequently 100 as it is. These measures were done, including closing borders, making sure that public events were also restricted to a certain number of people, so that we will be in a position to restrict the movement of citizens and people. Because the World Health Organization has indicated that it is when people move that results in a number of the infections as we see. Now we have the infections going into the community, and the case count currently, that is the formal case on the website of the Ghana Health Service, that is the official confirmed cases, are 9,910. Now this is the case count from start to date. So it's an up-to-date case. However, we say that we've had a number of recoveries, 3,645 and 48 deaths. So the active cases currently in Ghana in communities, especially in Accra, for which we have about 6,400 in excess of them, just around 6,217. Of course, we've had cases in other regions like the Ashanti region, Western region. So I would say that the measures internationally have been said to be bold. They've restricted people. They've ensured that PPEs have been distributed to various health centers, frontline health workers. They've also encouraged people, ordinary Ghanaians on the streets of our republic, to put on masks. And then even we've moved to the next step of saying that citizens need to put on the mask. So there's some form of enforceability to the directive in a way, even though it's not in the law.
Joy TV correspondent Roland Walker, thanks for speaking with us on the program. Let's bring you updates coming from Burundi, where news just in has it that the president, Pierre Nkurunziza, has died at the age of 55, suffering a cardiac arrest. Well, the government statement says that he was admitted to hospital on Saturday after feeling unwell. His condition then improved, but on Monday he had a cardiac arrest and efforts to revive him were unsuccessful. Mr. Nkurunziza was due to step down from the presidency in August after 15 years in power. Of course, we're still getting details of this story, but let's talk now to a former permanent secretary at the Nigerian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Ambassador Joe Keshi. Thank you very much for speaking with us, Ambassador Keshi. Well, tell us, what is your reaction to the news of the sudden demise of President Pierre Nkurunziza? All right, we'll reconnect with Ambassador Keshi in just a moment. But for now, let's bring things back here in Nigeria, where the Association of Foreign Relations Professionals of Nigeria has added its voice to the anti-racism protests in the United States around the world. In the statement, they say being aware of Nigeria's past contributions, both material and human resources, to the emancipation of the black man wherever they are, the group considers the circumstances surrounding George Floyd's death unacceptable and condemns racism in all its forms. The AFRPN says in the statement that it regards the U.S. as a model democracy and custodian of the protection of fundamental human rights of all peoples, irrespective of their color, religion, and geography, tribe, and tribe. It calls on relevant institutions as well as the government of the United States to ensure justice for Mr. Floyd. It also wants protesters to be peaceful and not resort to violence or destruction to life and property. It also calls on people of African descent in the world to come together to fight all forms of discrimination against the black people wherever it is perpetrated. Network Africa returns in just a moment with more stories. Please stay with us. Welcome back. Now let's take a look at the situation of coronavirus on the continent. South Africa still has the highest number of cases at over 50,879, followed by Egypt with 35,444, Nigeria with 12,081, Algeria with 10,265, and Ghana with 9,910. They are also the same countries with the highest number of deaths related to COVID-19. And as we see on the list here, Egypt with 1,271, South Africa 1,080, Algeria 715, Nigeria at 361, and Ghana with 48 deaths. Well, these are all figures gleaned from the Johns Hopkins University tally as at this afternoon. The South African government is expected to pay the Cuban doctors who arrived in the country weeks ago to help fight the coronavirus epidemic the huge sum of $14 million. The country's health minister, Willem Kizza, says the 187 specialists including biostatisticians, epidemiologists, family physicians, and health technologists, will be accommodated until 2021. It says the medics are qualified in areas in which the country was struggling to produce enough experts. The arrival of Cuban doctors in South Africa to help fight coronavirus ruffled feathers, as an association said unemployed local medics should have been given priority to work. And here in Nigeria, the World Health Organization is warning about the risks associated with increased use of antibiotics for the treatment of COVID-19 in the country. According to the World Body's representative in the country, the practice has led to a rise in resistance to antibiotic drugs in the treatment of other diseases.
The COVID pandemic has led to increased use of antibiotics, which ultimately lead to higher bacterial resistance rates that will ultimately impact the burden of disease and deaths during the pandemic and beyond. New antimicrobial resistance data released by WHO shows that globally a worrying number of bacterial infections are increasingly resistant to the medicines at hand to treat them. We also know that based on evidence, only a small proportion of COVID-19 patients do need antibiotics to treat subsequent bacterial infections. And the organization has released new clinical management guidance not to provide antibiotic therapy or prophylaxis to patients with mild COVID-19 or to patients with suspected or confirmed moderate COVID-19 illness, unless there is a clinical indication to do so. The choice of antibiotics is based on the clinical diagnosis, the local epidemiology, and antibiotic susceptibility, as well as the treatment guidelines. So close review and monitoring of patients is therefore required to determine when to use the antibiotics. Thank you.
Staying with our lead story coming from Burundi, where President Pierre Nkurunziza has died at the age of 55 after suffering a cardiac arrest. The government statement says that he was admitted to hospital on Saturday after feeling unwell, but his condition then improved. But on Monday, he had a cardiac arrest and efforts to revive him were unsuccessful. Mr. Nkurunziza was due to step down from the presidency in August after 15 years in power. The former permanent secretary at the Nigerian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Ambassador Joe Keshi, is back with us via telephone now to react to former President Pierre Nkurunziza's death in Burundi. Good evening, Ambassador Keshi. Thanks for joining us on the program. So tell us, how would you react to the sudden demise of President Nkurunziza?
I think, to start with, may so rest in peace. And it's just unfortunate because I think he was planning an interesting transition. This is a man who has refused to give up power, not once or twice. And it's not impossible that his health might have been affected by the way and manner he was going about the transition. But I guess the best we can hope for now, as we await the details, is to hope that Burundi will find peace and tranquility and be able to, to move on. Hopefully, another strong man who would like to clinch up to power will not arise out of the demise of the current president.
Now, he had such a controversial profile, even for president. Of course, much of the country wallowed in poverty, and politically the nation was a mess. What's the legacy Africa should remember of him?
I guess that's just the point I made, that his time in office has been very, very controversial, more because he's been more interested in prolonging and staying in office as much as possible. If I remember correctly, or if my memory serves me right, I believe an election was held recently, or an election it's about to be held. I can't remember which now, but every indication was that he was not interested in giving up power, but was trying to install a puppet in such a way that he will remain in office, but he will remain in power, but not, or he will remain in office. No, the new president will be in charge of the presidency, but he will be the power behind the presidency and still running things from outside the view of most people. But the point still remains that it's been very controversial, particularly in the last 4 years when he refused to give up power and more or less got the military to assist him to clinch on to power. But like I said, it's the end of one era. Let's just hope that whoever emerges as the next president of Burundi would honestly focus on solving the multitude of problems that confront the Burundis today.
Thanks again, Ambassador Keshi, for speaking with us on
Thank you very much. Thanks.
Now, the coronavirus lockdown restrictions has affected many businesses in Africa, and for many countries before the lockdown, the second-hand market has taken a hit as well. But will things ever return to normal? We'll check in on the market in Lagos, Nigeria.
36-year-old Mohammed Sabri is one of those coffee shops. Before the coronavirus pandemic, the Yaba market in Lagos, Nigeria's commercial city, was bustling with activity. But now, with lockdown restrictions and the economy taking a big hit from COVID-19, activities have dropped. But with the phased reopening of the economy, sellers at the second-hand market are scrambling to make sales, including those found at the Yaba market.
So people are no longer buying because of what they believe, that when you buy second-hand clothing, that you contact the disease. So, but it is not truth.
On a normal day, we make like, let me say 100K, make 150K, you get in a day. But since the outbreak of the virus, 30, before you even get 40 by the grace of God, because the outcome of people is on the shortage. So that's what I feel is really affecting the business.
In 2018, Nigeria imported over $135 million in used clothing, becoming the 6th largest importer in the world, with major import markets like United Kingdom, South Korea and China, according to the Observatory of Economic Complexity Data Visualization tool. Despite government's efforts to clamp down the business of second-hand clothing, popularly called tokumbo or okrika, to give room for domestic manufacturing, it's still a thriving business. For most Nigerians who live on the $1, patronizing second-hand traders means they are able to afford basic quality clothing at affordable rates.
I'm not scared of buying things in the market. So far you disinfect it and you keep clean. Everything is okay.
We can't do entirely without importing these materials. We use fairly used electronics, fairly used clothes, fairly used furniture, and this has become a part of the lives of many people even before COVID-19 came up. So definitely what we need to do now is to make sure that as these items are getting imported, even at the customs or at this point of entry, you institute barriers. There are disinfectants, we have disinfecting sprays, disinfecting solutions, scans, checks. So what we need to do is to make practical protocols, easy guidelines that people can easily follow.
As at the last count, Nigeria has more than 12,800 cases of COVID-19 and continues to strive to keep up with testing and high recovery rates.
In all, staying safe always remains key. That's where we end today's program. Thank you so much for watching. I am Bisi Adebayo.